Lyra didn't know that the man she accidentally spilled wine on was the most powerful alpha in 5 kingdoms. She didn't know he'd been searching for his mate for 7 years. And she certainly didn't know that the moment her clumsy hands touched his, her entire world would shatter and reform. The great hall stretched before her like a cathedral of shadows and candlelight, empty except for the whisper of her worn slippers against stone. Dawn was still hours away, but Lyra had learned long ago that invisible girls worked best in darkness. No one questioned a servant who appeared and disappeared like smoke, polishing silver and scrubbing floors while the castle slept. She moved through the routine that had defined her 19 years of life, polished the enormous oak tables until they gleamed, arranged the chairs with mathematical precision, check each goblet for spots that would earn her a beating from the head butler. She was nothing. She had always been nothing. The orphaned girl with no pack, no family, no wolf to mark her as worthy of notice. The morning light crept through stained glass windows, painting the hall in jewelled colours that made her pause. For just a moment she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to belong somewhere this beautiful, to be someone who mattered. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Lyra's heart jumped, and she ducked behind the nearest pillar, pressing her back against the cold stone. The diplomatic gathering wasn't supposed to start for hours, but voices carried through the massive doors. Male voices, deep and commanding, speaking in the careful tones of politics and power. She should have fled to the kitchens, should have made herself scarce like the good little nobody she was trained to be. Instead, something kept her frozen as the doors swung open and 3 men entered the hall. The first 2 she recognised. Lord Chancellor Voss, thin and sharp-featured, always ready with a cruel word for servants who moved too slowly. Behind him, Duke Aldrich, whose pale eyes had followed her with uncomfortable interest since she'd turned 18. But the third man, gods above and below. He moved like liquid shadow, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that caught the morning light. Even from her hiding place behind the pillar, she could feel something radiating from him. Power, danger, the kind of presence that made every instinct scream both run and kneel. "Your Majesty," Voss was saying, "the Northern Territories delegation should arrive within the hour. If we could review the treaty terms once more." Majesty. Lyra's blood went cold. This was him, the Alpha King himself, Matthias Blackthorne, ruler of the 5 kingdoms and the most feared wolf-shifter alive. She'd heard whispers about him in the kitchens, how he'd taken the throne at 21 after his family's murder, how he'd united the warring packs through a combination of brutal efficiency and impossible charisma, how he'd remained unmated despite every eligible female in 5 kingdoms throwing themselves at his feet. She needed to leave now. Lyra took a careful step backward, then another, keeping to the shadows behind the massive stone pillars. Her heart hammered against her ribs so loudly she was certain they would hear it. Just a few more steps, and she could slip through the servants' entrance and pretend this never happened. Her foot caught the edge of the wine cart she'd forgotten she'd left there. Time slowed as the heavy crystal decanter tilted, wobbled, and crashed to the stone floor with a sound like breaking thunder. Deep red wine spread across the pristine white marble like blood, and Lyra found herself sprawled in the middle of it all, her servant's dress soaked crimson. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward her with the weight of Judgment Day. "Well," Duke Aldrich's voice dripped with disdain, "it seems we have a spy." Lyra scrambled to her knees, wine dripping from her hair, panic making her clumsy. I'm so sorry, I was just cleaning, I didn't mean—" Silence. Voss stepped forward, his hand already rising. "You insolent little—" "Stop!" The single word cut through the air with absolute authority. Not shouted, barely above conversational volume, but it stopped Voss's hand mid-swing and made Duke Aldrich step back involuntarily. The Alpha King moved toward her with predatory grace, and Lyra found herself frozen like a rabbit before a wolf. Up close, he was devastating. Sharp cheekbones, a mouth that was too sensual for the harsh planes of his face, and eyes the colour of storm clouds shot through with silver. Those eyes locked onto hers, and the world exploded. Heat raced up her arm from where wine-sticky fingers still pressed against stone. The sensation spread through her chest, settling somewhere behind her sternum like a golden thread pulled taut. Her breath caught as something impossible and terrifying and beautiful unfurled inside her ribs. No, this couldn't be happening, not to her, not with him. The Alpha King knelt beside her in the spreading wine, heedless of his expensive clothes, and reached out one strong hand. "Let me help you." Lyra stared at the offered hand like it might burn her, because it would. She knew with absolute certainty that if she touched him skin to skin, everything would change. Everything. "I can manage," she whispered, but her voice came out broken and strange. His hand remained steady, palm up, waiting. "I'm sure you can, but you don't have to." Their eyes met again, and this time the golden thread behind her ribs pulled so hard she gasped. The Alpha King's pupils dilated, his nostrils flaring as if he was scenting something impossible. "Your Majesty," Duke Aldrich's voice came from very far away, though he stood only a few feet distant. "Surely you don't need to concern yourself with a clumsy servant girl." Those storm-grey eyes never left Lyra's face. "What's your name?" "Lyra." The word escaped before she could stop it. "Lyra." He repeated it like he was tasting something precious. "I'm Mightiest." As if she didn't know, as if the most powerful man in 5 kingdoms was introducing himself to a nobody who'd just destroyed a priceless wine decanter and made a fool of herself in front of royalty. She took his hand. The moment their skin touched, lightning shot up her arm and straight to her heart. The golden thread blazed to life, connecting her to him in ways that had no name. She saw his eyes widen, saw the exact moment he felt it too, this impossible, terrifying, beautiful thing that bound them together. Mate. The word whispered through her mind in a voice that wasn't quite her own, and from the sharp intake of his breath she knew he'd heard it too. He helped her to her feet with infinite gentleness, his large hands steady on her wine-soaked arms. They stood there in the ruins of crystal and spilled wine, staring at each other like the rest of the world had ceased to exist. "This is highly irregular," Voss sputtered. "Your Majesty, if you would just leave us." Matthias's voice held the quiet command of absolute power. "Both of you, now." Duke Aldrich's face flushed red. "Your Majesty, surely you can't mean to—" "I said leave." This time there was no mistaking the alpha dominance in his voice. Both men bowed hastily and retreated, though Duke Aldrich threw a look back over his shoulder that promised this wasn't over. And then they were alone. Lyra became acutely aware of how she must look. Soaked in wine, hair dishevelled, wearing the plain brown dress that marked her as the lowest of servants. Everything about her screamed common, worthless, forgettable. Everything about him screamed power, nobility, impossible to reach. "I should go," she whispered, taking a step back. The golden thread stretched between them, painful in its intensity. "I should clean this up and—" "Look at me." She couldn't help but obey. Those storm-grey eyes held her captive, searching her face like he was memorizing every detail. "How long have you worked here?" His voice was gentler now, but no less commanding. "Since I was 7, 12 years. The words tumbled out. "I'm sorry about the wine. I'll pay for it. I'll work extra shifts. I know I shouldn't have been here, but I was cleaning, and then you came in, and I tried to leave, but—" "Lyra." Her name on his lips stopped her babbling instantly. "Breathe." She drew a shaky breath, then another. The panic was still there, but underneath it something else. Something that felt suspiciously like hope. "Tell me about your family." The simple question hit her like a physical blow. "I don't have one. I'm an orphan. No pack, no parents, no siblings. I've been alone since—" She swallowed hard. "Since always." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of pain that seemed to echo her own. "I know what that feels like." "You?" The question escaped before she could stop it, and she immediately flushed. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "My family was murdered when I was 21. Parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, everyone." He said it matter-of-factly, but she could hear the carefully controlled pain underneath. "I've been alone for 7 years." 7 years, the same amount of time he'd been searching for his mate, according to the kitchen gossip. Lyra's heart clenched with unexpected sympathy. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That must have been terrible." It was. He stepped closer, and she caught his scent, pine and leather, and something wild that made her wolfless soul ache with longing. "But perhaps we don't have to be alone anymore." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Lyra's mind reeled. This couldn't be what she thought it was. Men like him didn't mate with girls like her. There had to be some mistake. "I don't understand," she whispered. Matthias reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his strong hands. His thumbs brushed away wine drops from her cheekbones with infinite tenderness. "Come with me," he said simply. "Let me show you that you're worth so much more than you believe." Every rational thought in her head screamed that this was impossible, that he would realize his mistake the moment they left this hall, that she was still just the worthless orphan girl who cleaned floors and tried to remain invisible. But the golden thread sang in her chest, and for the first time in her life someone was looking at her like she mattered, like she was precious, like she was everything. "Okay," she whispered, and watched something fierce and triumphant light up his storm-grey eyes. As he led her toward the door, her old life crumbling behind them like the shattered crystal on the floor, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into a story that would either save her or destroy her completely. Maybe both. The Alpha King's private chambers were nothing like Lyra had imagined. She'd expected cold marble and imposing furniture, the kind of royal grandeur designed to intimidate. Instead, she found herself in rooms that felt surprisingly lived in. Dark leather chairs positioned near a crackling fireplace, bookshelves that reached the ceiling, filled with volumes that actually looked read, windows that let in soft afternoon light, making everything warm and golden. Nothing like the servants' quarters, where she'd spent her entire life. "Sit," Matthias said gently, gesturing to one of the leather chairs. "Please." Lyra remained standing, acutely aware of her wine-stained dress and the way she probably smelled of spilled alcohol and cleaning supplies. "I should go. I should change and clean up and—" "Lyra." Her name stopped her rambling instantly. "You're safe here." Safe. The word hit her like a physical thing, settling somewhere deep in her chest, beside the golden thread that still hummed between them. When was the last time she'd felt safe anywhere? She perched on the edge of the chair, ready to flee at the first sign that this was all some elaborate joke. Maybe the kitchen staff would burst in laughing. Maybe Duke Aldrich would appear to drag her to the dungeons for daring to touch royalty. Maybe. "Tell me how you came to work at the castle." His voice cut through her spiralling thoughts. Matthias had taken the chair across from her, close enough that she could smell his scent. Pine and leather and something wild that made her pulse race. Close enough to see the way firelight caught in his storm-grey eyes. "My parents died when I was 7, she said carefully. Fever took half the village that winter. The castle was hiring kitchen staff, and I was small enough to fit in spaces others couldn't clean, so they took me in." "And you've been here ever since?" Lyra nodded, studying her hands. 12 years of washing dishes and scrubbing floors. I'm good at being invisible." "You're not invisible to me." The quietly spoken words made her look up sharply. The intensity in his gaze should have frightened her, but instead it sent warmth spiralling through her chest. "You don't understand," she said desperately. "I'm nobody. I don't have a pack. I can't even shift. I'm not the kind of person who belongs in places like this." Matthias leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "What do you know about me, Lyra?" The question caught her off guard. "Everyone knows about you, the Alpha King who united the 5 kingdoms, the wolf who brought peace to the territories. What else?" She shifted uncomfortably. "They say you've been looking for your mate for 7 years, that every eligible female in the kingdoms has tried to catch your attention." "All true." His mouth quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Do you know why none of them succeeded?" Lyra shook her head. "Because none of them were you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs as the golden thread in her chest pulled taut, urging her to believe what seemed impossible. "I don't understand," she whispered. Matthias rose from his chair and moved to the window, staring out at the courtyard below. His broad shoulders were tense beneath his fine shirt, and when he spoke, his voice carried a pain she hadn't expected. "I was 21 when they came for my family. Assassins, sent by the northern rebels who thought eliminating the royal bloodline would give them power." His hands clenched at his sides. "I was away, leading a patrol on the border. I came home to find everyone I loved dead." Lyra's breath caught. She wanted to go to him, to offer comfort somehow, but she remained frozen in her chair. "I spent the next 3 years hunting down every single person responsible," Matthias continued. "I brought peace to the kingdoms through blood and steel and sheer determination. But at the end of it all, I was completely alone. No family, no one who truly knew me, just a crown and a castle full of people who feared me more than they loved me." He turned back to face her, and the raw vulnerability in his eyes made her chest ache. "For 7 years I've attended every gathering, every ceremony, every attempt at matchmaking my advisors could arrange. Beautiful women, powerful women, women who would have made perfect political alliances, and I felt nothing. Nothing except the growing certainty that I was destined to rule alone." The golden thread hummed between them, and Lyra pressed her hand to her chest, feeling its warmth. "Then this morning a clumsy servant girl spilled wine on me," Matthias said softly, moving closer, "and for the first time in 7 years I felt like I could breathe again." "I don't believe you," Lyra whispered, even as every instinct told her he was speaking the truth. "Believe this." He knelt beside her chair, bringing them to eye level. "When you touched my hand, what did you feel?" Heat flooded her cheeks. I felt like lightning." "So did I. That golden thread in your chest? I have one too. It's been empty for 28 years, and now it's singing because you're here." Lyra stared at him, her world tilting off its axis. "But I'm nothing special. I'm just—" "You're everything," he interrupted fiercely. "You're everything I've been searching for." Before she could protest again, a soft knock interrupted them. Matthias rose smoothly, his expression shifting back to royal composure. Enter." A maid appeared, carrying a tray laden with food that smelled better than anything from the servants' kitchen. Behind her, another servant carried an armload of clothing. "Your Majesty," the first maid said with a curtsy, "you requested refreshments and suitable attire." "Thank you, Elena. Please set everything down and go." Elena's eyes flickered curiously to Lyra, but she merely nodded and did as instructed. Within moments they were alone again. Lyra stared at the beautiful gowns draped over the couch. Deep blue silk, emerald green velvet, fabrics she'd never dreamed of touching, let alone wearing. "I can't," she breathed. "Why not?" "Because I'm a servant. I clean these kinds of dresses. I don't wear them." Matthias moved to stand beside her, close enough that his warmth seeped through her wine-stained clothes. "You're not a servant any more, Lyra. You're my mate." The word sent shivers through her entire body. Mate. Something she'd dreamed about in the darkest corners of her lonely heart. Something she'd convinced herself she'd never have, because what wolf would want a girl who couldn't even shift? "I need time," she whispered. "This is all happening so fast, and I don't know how to—" "I'll wait." His voice was infinitely patient. "However long you need, I'll wait." Something cracked open in her chest at the simple promise. When had anyone ever waited for her? When had anyone ever given her a choice instead of simply telling her what to do? "The court won't accept it," she said desperately. "They'll say you're mad choosing someone like me." A dangerous light flickered in Matthias's eyes. Let them try. Duke Aldrich already looked at me like I was something unpleasant he'd stepped in. Duke Aldrich is a problem I'll handle. The quiet menace in his voice made her shiver. "No one will hurt you, Lyra. I won't allow it." She wanted to believe him, wanted to sink into the safety he offered and let herself be protected for the first time in her life. But 19 years of being nobody didn't disappear in a single afternoon. "What if you change your mind?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "What if you wake up tomorrow and realize you made a mistake?" Matthias reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones with heartbreaking gentleness. "Look at me," he said softly. "Really look at me." Lyra met his storm-grey eyes and saw her own uncertainty reflected there, along with something deeper, something that looked suspiciously like wonder. "I've been searching for you for 7 years," he said, each word carefully measured. 7 years of hoping and praying and slowly losing faith that you even existed. Do you really think I would throw that away over doubt?" The golden thread in her chest pulled so hard she gasped. This time, instead of fighting it, she let herself feel the connection between them, let herself believe just for a moment that she might actually be wanted. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I." The confession surprised her. "You? You're the Alpha King. You're not afraid of anything." "I'm terrified," Matthias said quietly. "Terrified that you'll run. Terrified that I'll do something wrong and lose you before I've even had a chance to know you. Terrified that this is all some cruel dream I'll wake up from." His honesty broke down another wall around her heart. Here was the most powerful man in 5 kingdoms, admitting his fears to a servant girl, treating her like an equal despite the impossibility of their situation. "I don't know how to be anything other than invisible," she whispered. "Then I'll teach you." His hands were still cradling her face, anchoring her in this moment that felt too precious to be real. "I'll teach you that you're worthy of being seen, of being cherished, of taking up space in the world." Lyra closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. When she opened them again, she found him watching her with infinite patience. "The clothes," she said hesitantly. Could I try one of the dresses?" The smile that spread across Matthias's face was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "I was hoping you'd ask." As she rose on unsteady legs to approach the beautiful gowns, Lyra caught sight of herself in the mirror across the room. Wine-stained and bedraggled, she looked exactly like what she was, a servant girl who'd stumbled into a fairy tale. But for the first time in her life, she thought she might be brave enough to see where the story led. The days that followed were a strange kind of happiness Lyra had never imagined possible. She woke each morning in chambers that rivaled the king's own, draped in silk sheets that cost more than she'd earned in her entire life. Servants who had once ignored her now curtsied when she passed, though she caught the whispers that followed in her wake. The wine girl, the nobody the Alpha King had taken a fancy to. How long before he tired of his little pet? Lyra tried to ignore them, tried to focus on the impossible reality of sharing meals with Matthias, of long conversations by the fire where he listened to her opinions as if they mattered. He was teaching her to read properly, his large hands gentle as they guided her through passages of poetry she'd never dreamed of understanding. He was patient with her questions, amused by her wonder at things the nobility took for granted. For 4 perfect days she almost believed she could belong in this world. Then Duke Aldrich reminded her exactly what she was. The formal dinner was meant to welcome the Northern Territories delegation. Lyra had begged Mightiest to let her stay in her chambers, knowing she didn't belong among the glittering nobles who would grace his table. But he'd insisted she take her place at his side, his mate, his equal. She should have trusted her instincts. The great hall blazed with candlelight and opulent wealth. Lords and ladies draped in jewels and silk filled the massive oak table, their laughter tinkling like crystal. At the head of the table, Matthias sat with the easy confidence of a man born to rule, devastatingly handsome in his formal attire, and beside him sat Lyra, wearing a gown of deep sapphire silk that cost more than the entire servants' quarters, feeling like a fraud with every breath. "Your Majesty?" Duke Aldrich rose from his seat, wine goblet in hand. "If I may propose a toast?" Matthias's expression remained carefully neutral, but Lyra caught the tension that flickered through his shoulders. "Of course, Duke Aldrich." Aldrich's pale eyes found Lyra across the table, and something cold slithered down her spine. "To new companions, may we all remember the importance of knowing one's place." Polite murmurs rippled around the table, but Lyra heard the underlying current of malice. Several of the noble ladies exchanged meaningful glances, their eyes sharp with judgment. "Indeed," Lady Ravencrest spoke up, her voice carrying the kind of aristocratic disdain that cut like glass. "Though I confess myself curious about our newest guest. Tell me, my dear, which family are you from? I don't recognise the name." The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Lyra's mouth went dry as every eye in the room turned toward her. Matthias reached for her hand under the table, his touch warm and reassuring, but it couldn't stop the panic rising in her throat. She began, then stopped. What could she say? That she had no family, that she'd spent her life scrubbing the floors these people walked on. "Come now," Duke Aldrich's voice was silk wrapped around poison. "Surely you're not shy. We're all friends here." Matthias's fingers tightened on hers, but before he could speak, Aldrich continued. "Or perhaps introductions are in order. Lords and ladies, allow me to present Miss Lyra, though I'm afraid I don't know her surname. You see, she doesn't have one. She's the little orphan who's been cleaning our chamber pots for the past 12 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Lyra felt the blood drain from her face as shocked murmurs rippled around the table. Lady Ravencrest's fan snapped shut with an audible click. Lord Hawthorne nearly choked on his wine. The northern delegation stared at her with expressions ranging from confusion to disgust. "An orphan servant," Lady Ravencrest breathed, her voice dripping with horrified fascination. "How novel." "Indeed," Aldrich smiled, the expression sharp as a serpent's fang. "No family, no bloodline, no pact to claim her. Why, I believe she can't even shift. Quite the prize for a king, wouldn't you say?" Each word hit Lyra like a physical blow. Her chest constricted as shame flooded through her, hot and poisonous. This was what she was, what she'd always been. A nobody, pretending to be something she could never become. The golden thread in her chest pulled tight, painful with her distress. She felt Matthias's power spike beside her, dangerous and barely contained, but she couldn't look at him, couldn't bear to see the moment he realised his advisers were right. "How fascinating," Lady Ravencrest continued with false brightness. "Tell me, dear, did you think you could simply marry your way out of the kitchens? How delightfully ambitious." Laughter tittered around the table, cruel and cutting. Lyra's hands trembled in her lap as the beautiful gown that had made her feel like a princess suddenly became a costume, a pathetic masquerade that fooled no one. "That's enough." Matthias's voice cut through the mockery like a blade, low and deadly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as his alpha dominance filled the space, making every wolf present bare their necks in instinctive submission. But the damage was done. Lyra pushed back from the table, her chair scraping against stone. "Excuse me," she whispered, and fled. She ran through corridors that had become familiar, past servants who pressed themselves against walls to avoid her, past guards who watched with uncomfortable expressions. She didn't stop until she reached the gardens, where moonlight turned everything silver and cold. The rose bushes where she and Matthias had walked just that afternoon seemed to mock her now. What had she been thinking? That she could simply step out of her old life and into a fairy tale. That love could bridge the impossible gap between a king and a servant. Lyra. She turned to find Matthias striding across the garden, his formal jacket discarded, his shirt partially unlaced. Even dishevelled, he looked every inch the powerful Alpha King. And she was still just the orphan who cleaned his floors. "Don't," she said when he reached for her. "Please don't." "Don't what?" "Don't pretend this can work." Tears she'd been holding back finally spilled down her cheeks. "They're right. They're all right. I don't belong here, and I never will." "Lyra! I can't even shift." The words burst out of her like a dam breaking. "I have no family, no bloodline, no pack. I'm nobody, Matthias. I'm just a broken girl who doesn't belong anywhere." The pain in his eyes nearly undid her, but she forced herself to continue. "You deserve someone who can stand beside you as an equal, someone who won't embarrass you in front of your court or make your advisers question your judgment, someone who—" "You're everything." The words stopped her mid-sentence. Matthias moved closer, his hands cupping her face with heartbreaking gentleness. "You're everything," he repeated, tilting her face toward the moonlight. "You're brave and kind and stronger than any of those pampered nobles in there. You've survived things that would have broken them, and you came through it with your heart intact." "I'm nothing special," she whispered, even as the golden thread in her chest blazed at his touch. "You're everything to me." His thumbs brushed away her tears with infinite tenderness. "Your worth isn't measured by bloodlines or shifting abilities or the approval of people who have never known a day of real hardship. It's measured by this." He pressed his hand over her heart, where the golden thread sang between them. "By the way you make me feel like I'm not alone anymore. By your laugh when I tell you stories about my childhood. By the way you see beauty in broken things and try to fix them. By the fact that in a room full of people trying to impress me, you're the only one who asks how I'm feeling." Lyra stared up at him, her world reshaping itself around his words. "They'll never accept me," she said brokenly. "Then they can leave." The quiet steel in his voice made her breath catch. "My court serves me, Lyra, not the other way around, and I choose you. I will always choose you." The golden thread pulled taut between them, and for the first time since Aldrich's cruel revelation, Lyra felt something other than shame. Hope, tentative and fragile, but real. "What if I can't learn to be what you need?" "You already are what I need." Matthias leaned his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her skin. "I don't need a perfect princess, love. I need you, exactly as you are, love." He'd called her love. Something cracked open in her chest, letting in light she'd thought lost forever. The golden thread blazed bright and warm, connecting them in ways that had nothing to do with bloodlines or shifting abilities or the approval of courts. "I felt it too," she whispered. "When they were laughing, when I wanted to disappear. I felt you, the bond. It was like you were holding me up even when you weren't touching me." "Because I was." His hands threaded through her hair, anchoring her to him. "That's what mates do, Lyra. We hold each other up. We choose each other again and again, no matter what the world says." She looked up into his storm-grey eyes and saw her future reflected there. Not perfect, not easy, but real, worth fighting for. "I'm still scared," she admitted. "So am I, but I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." The words settled into her bones like truth, like home. "Oh, okay," she said softly. "Okay, but what happens now? Your court still thinks I'm a fortune-hunting servant." A dangerous smile curved Matthias's lips, the expression sharp enough to cut glass. "Now I remind them exactly who rules the 5 kingdoms and who they answer to." The promise in his voice sent shivers down her spine, but not from fear, from anticipation. "Will you trust me?" he asked, his hands still cradling her face like she was something precious. Lyra thought of the cruel laughter, the cutting words, the way she'd felt so small and worthless just moments ago. Then she thought of the way Matthias looked at her, like she hung the stars in his sky. The way he'd defended her, chosen her, called her everything. "Yes," she whispered, and watched something fierce and protective blaze to life in his eyes. As he kissed her there in the moonlit garden, soft and sweet and full of promise, Lyra finally understood what the golden thread meant. It wasn't about bloodlines or worthiness or the approval of others. It was about choice and love and the courage to believe that sometimes broken girls and lonely kings could create something beautiful together, something that no amount of cruel laughter could destroy. 2 weeks after Duke Aldrich's humiliation, Lyra finally began to believe that happiness might be something she was allowed to keep. The court's whispers had faded to sullen murmurs. Several nobles who had laughed at the dinner had found themselves suddenly unable to secure audiences with the king. Duke Aldrich himself had been conspicuously absent from court functions, though Lyra caught glimpses of his pale eyes watching her from shadows when she walked the corridors. But those glimpses felt distant now, like echoes of a nightmare she was finally waking from. Mightiest kept his promises. He defended her when whispers grew too loud, elevated servants who showed her kindness, and slowly but steadily made it clear that Lyra's place at his side was not negotiable. More than that, he showed her what it felt like to matter, to be seen not as a burden or an inconvenience, but as someone precious. "Tell me about the orphanage," Lyra said one morning as they broke their fast together in his private chambers. "What orphanage?" Matthias looked up from the correspondence he'd been reading, his storm-grey eyes warm with attention. "The one we could build, in the east wing that's been empty since the renovations, for children who have nowhere else to go." The smile that spread across his face made the golden thread in her chest sing with joy. "You want to build an orphanage?" "I know what it feels like to have nowhere to belong," she said softly. "Maybe we could give other children something I never had, a place where they're wanted." Matthias set down his letters and reached for her hands, threading their fingers together. "We'll start planning today." The word "we" sent warmth flooding through her. Not "I'll consider it" or "that's a nice idea." We, as if her dreams had become his dreams, her desires worth acting upon. It was in this golden bubble of contentment that Duke Aldrich struck. They were walking in the garden that had become their sanctuary, discussing plans for the children's wing, when the first crossbow bolt hissed past Lyra's ear. Time fractured into crystalline shards. Matthias's body slammed into hers, driving them both behind the marble fountain as more bolts sprouted from the earth where they'd been standing. His arms wrapped around her protectively, his larger frame shielding her from whatever death was raining down from the shadows. "Stay down," he growled, his voice already roughening with the edge of his wolf. Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed herself against the cold marble, terror making her limbs shake. But beneath the fear, something else blazed to life, something fierce and protective that she'd never felt before. 3 men emerged from the ornamental hedges, crossbows aimed and loaded. Their faces were hidden behind dark masks, but she recognized the silver bolts designed to kill shifters, the coordinated way they moved. This wasn't random violence. This was assassination. "Your Majesty!" the center assassin called out, his voice muffled but mocking. "How noble of you to shield the servant girl, but she's the target tonight. Step aside and you can live." Rage flooded through Lyra so suddenly it stole her breath. They weren't here for Matthias, they were here for her. Someone wanted her dead badly enough to hire killers with silver weapons. "Who sent you?" Matthias's voice carried the full force of his alpha dominance, enough to make lesser wolves submit immediately. The assassin seemed unaffected. "Someone who believes the kingdom would be better served without unsuitable influences on its king." Duke Aldrich. It had to be. "I won't hide behind you," Lyra whispered to Matthias, her hands fisting in the fabric of his shirt. "If they want me, they can't have you." The words came out as a snarl, and she felt the moment his control snapped. Power exploded outward from Matthias like a physical force. The assassins stumbled backward as his alpha dominance crashed over them, but they recovered quickly, silver-tipped bolts already nocked and ready. Lyra watched in horror as they took aim at the man who meant everything to her, the man who was protecting her at the cost of his own safety, the man who would die because someone thought she wasn't worthy of love. No. The word roared through her mind with such force that the golden thread in her chest blazed like fire. She wouldn't let them kill him. She wouldn't let anyone hurt him because of her. Without conscious thought, Lyra threw herself sideways, placing her body between Matthias and the crossbows just as the assassins fired. "Lyra, no!" The silver bolt meant for his heart took her in the shoulder instead, spinning her around and driving her to the ground. Pain exploded through her arm, burning like liquid fire as the silver began to poison her blood. Matthias's roar of rage shook the very foundations of the castle. The sound that erupted from him wasn't entirely human. Bones cracked and reformed as his body began to shift, power radiating from him in waves that made the very air shimmer. His wolf was massive, midnight black with silver eyes that promised death to anyone who threatened his mate. The assassins didn't stand a chance. Lyra's vision blurred as the silver poisoning spread through her system, but she watched through pain-hazed eyes as Matthias's wolf tore through the men who had dared to hurt her. It was over in seconds, their bodies scattered across the garden like broken dolls. Then he was shifting back, naked and magnificent and desperate as he knelt beside her, his hands hovering over the bolt protruding from her shoulder. "Don't touch it," she gasped. "Silver burns wolves." "I don't care." His hands were shaking as he examined the wound, his face pale with terror. "Lyra, what were you thinking? I could have handled them." "They were going to kill you." Each word was an effort as the poison worked its way deeper. "Because of me. I couldn't let that happen." "You beautiful, brave, impossible woman." Tears tracked down his cheeks as he gathered her carefully into his arms. "You could have died." "You're worth dying for," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face with trembling fingers. "You're worth everything." The golden thread between them pulsed with their shared pain and terror and love, binding them together even as her strength began to fade. "Hold on," Matthias commanded, his voice breaking. "Hold on, love. I'm getting you to the healers." As he lifted her, carrying her toward the castle with supernatural speed, Lyra felt something shifting inside her. The poison was burning through her veins, but beneath it something else was awakening, something that had been sleeping her entire life. "Matthias!" she gasped against his chest. "I'm here. I'm right here." I think I can feel my wolf." He stumbled, nearly dropping her in his shock. "What?" Heat was building under her skin, pushing against the silver's cold poison. For 19 years she'd believed herself broken, defective, unable to shift like other wolves. But now, with death creeping through her blood and her mate's anguish flooding their bond, she felt something ancient and powerful stirring to life. "She's been sleeping," Lyra whispered in wonder. All this time she was just waiting. Waiting for what? For something worth protecting. The golden thread blazed between them as they reached the castle, servants scattering before their king's desperate flight toward the healing chambers. Behind them, the garden fountains ran red with the blood of assassins, but Lyra felt no guilt. They had threatened her mate, her family, her home, and that was unforgivable. As darkness began to creep around the edges of her vision, Lyra held tight to two certainties. Matthias loved her enough to weep over her broken body, and somewhere deep inside her chest, a wolf was finally learning how to howl. The last thing she heard before unconsciousness claimed her was the sound of Duke Aldrich's voice in the corridor. all false concern and barely concealed satisfaction. "Tragic," he was saying to someone, "though perhaps it's for the best. Now His Majesty can choose a more suitable companion." Rage flared through the golden thread, and Lyra smiled despite the pain. Duke Aldrich had just made his final mistake. Lyra woke to the sound of silver bells and the scent of antiseptic herbs. Her shoulder throbbed with a deep, persistent ache, but the burning silver poison was gone from her veins. Weak afternoon sunlight filtered through tall windows, and she realized she was lying in the royal healing chambers, wrapped in blankets, soft as clouds. "You're awake?" She turned her head to find Matthias sitting beside her bed, his hair dishevelled, his formal clothes rumpled as if he'd slept in them. Dark circles shadowed his storm-grey eyes, but relief flooded his face the moment their gazes met. "How long?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. 3 days. His hand found hers, threading their fingers together with desperate gentleness. "You nearly died, Lyra. The silver poisoning. If your wolf hadn't finally awakened to fight it off." Her wolf. Memory flooded back, the heat under her skin, the sense of something ancient stirring to life as she lay bleeding in the garden. "She's really there. She's there." Matthias's voice held wonder and fierce pride. "The healers say she's been dormant since birth, waiting for the right trigger. Extreme emotional stress, a life-or-death situation, the need to protect someone you love." The golden thread hummed between them, and Lyra felt her still weak wolf stretch lazily in response to his presence. She was small, this wolf of hers, silver-white and delicate, but her spirit burned bright. What happened to the assassins? Something dark flickered across Matthias's expression. "Dead. All of them." "And Duke Aldrich?" "Ah." Matthias's smile was sharp as a blade. "That's why I've been waiting for you to wake up. The entire court has been summoned to the throne room this afternoon. It seems we have a traitor to unmask." Lyra struggled to sit up despite the protest from her healing shoulder. "You have proof?" "One of the assassins lived long enough to confess before he succumbed to his injuries. Duke Aldrich paid them to kill you and make it look like an attack by northern rebels." His fingers tightened on hers. "He thought with you dead, I would have no choice but to accept a politically advantageous marriage." Rage flooded through her, hot and clean, not just for herself, but for Matthias, for the way Aldrich had tried to manipulate him, to steal his choice and his happiness for political gain. "I want to be there," she said firmly, "when you confront him. Lyra, you've barely... I want to be there." She met his eyes steadily. "He tried to have me murdered because he thought I was unworthy of you. I think I deserve to watch him fall." The fierce pride that blazed in Matthias's expression made the golden thread sing. "Then you'll be there, my Luna, at my side where you belong." 2 hours later, Lyra stood at the entrance to the throne room, wearing a gown of midnight blue silk that made her silver-streaked hair shine like starlight. Her left arm was bound in a sling, but her spine was straight and her chin raised. She had never felt more like herself. The throne room buzzed with tension. Every noble house was represented, their faces ranging from curious to concerned to smugly expectant. Duke Aldrich stood near the front, his pale eyes confident as he waited for whatever performance the king had planned. He didn't yet know that his hired assassins were dead. "Lords and ladies of the court," Matthias's voice carried easily through the vast space. He sat on the blackthorn throne like he was born to it, every inch the powerful Alpha King. "We are gathered today to address an act of treason against the crown." Murmurs rippled through the assembled nobles. Duke Aldrich's expression remained perfectly neutral, but Lyra caught the slight tightening around his eyes. 3 nights ago," Matthias continued, his voice gaining power with each word, "assassins attacked myself and my mate in the castle gardens. They came with silver weapons and specific orders to kill an unarmed woman." Lady Ravencrest gasped dramatically. Lord Hawthorne shifted uncomfortably. The northern delegation exchanged meaningful glances. Of course, the real target was never in question, Duke Aldrich spoke up, his voice carrying just the right note of concerned outrage. These northern rebels grow bolder by the day. To think they would attack you directly, Your Majesty. Yes, Matthias said quietly. It would be convenient if that were true. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Power radiated from the throne in waves, making every wolf present feel the weight of their alpha's dominance. Unfortunately for you, Aldrich, one of your assassins survived long enough to confess. The Duke's face went white. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. Jorik the Blade, professional killer from the eastern ports, he was very specific about who hired him and why. Matthias rose from his throne, each movement deliberate and predatory. He named you Duke Aldrich. He described the meeting, the payment, your exact instructions to make it look like a rebel attack. Aldrich took a step backward, his composure finally cracking. This is preposterous. You would take the word of a dying criminal over a man who tried to have my mate murdered? Matthias's voice was deadly quiet now, but it carried to every corner of the room. A man who thought he could manipulate me into a political marriage by removing the woman I love. Gasps echoed through the throne room. Several nobles actually stepped away from Duke Aldrich, as if his treachery might be contagious. You made one critical error, Aldrich, Matthias continued, moving down the steps toward the trembling Duke. You underestimated her. His eyes found Lyra's across the room, and the love blazing in them took her breath away. You saw a servant girl who didn't know her place. I see the woman who threw herself between me and silver-tipped crossbows. You saw an inconvenient obstacle to political gain. I see my Luna, my equal, my everything. The golden thread pulled taut between them as Matthias turned back to face the court. Lyra has no noble bloodline, he said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. She cannot trace her ancestry back 10 generations or recite the political alliances of her forebears. Do you know what she can do? He paused, letting the question hang in the air like a challenge. She can look at suffering and choose to act. She can see worth in forgotten children and fight to build them a home. She can face death without flinching if it means protecting someone she loves. She has more honour in her little finger than half this court has in their entire bodies. Lyra felt tears prick her eyes as his words washed over her. This was her mate, defending her not just from accusations, but from the fundamental belief that she wasn't enough. She is my mate, Matthias continued, his alpha dominance making the declaration resonate in every wolf's bones. She is my Luna, she is my queen, and anyone who threatens her threatens me. His storm-grey eyes fixed on Duke Aldrich with lethal intent, for the crime of attempted murder, for conspiracy against the crown, for treason. He paused, savouring the moment. Duke Aldrich, you are stripped of your title, your lands and your citizenship. You have until sunset to leave my territories, or you will hang. Aldrich collapsed to his knees, his face grey with terror. Your Majesty, please, I was only thinking of the kingdom's future. The kingdom's future, Matthias said coldly, lies with the woman brave enough to take silver for me, not with a man cowardly enough to hire assassins rather than face his king honestly. Guards stepped forward to escort the former duke from the throne room, but Matthias wasn't finished. Let this be understood by all present, he said, his voice carrying absolute finality. Lyra is my chosen queen. Any who question her place at my side question me. Any who threaten her will answer to my wolf, and any who think political convenience matters more than the bond between true mates will find themselves following Aldrich into exile. The throne room fell silent, except for the sound of Aldrich's retreating footsteps. Then, slowly, the nobles began to kneel. It started with Lord Commander Harrison, the gruff old soldier who had served 3 kings. Then Lady Blackwater, whose own love match had defied convention decades ago. One by one, the assembled court dropped to their knees in acknowledgement of their queen. Lyra stood frozen as an entire room full of people who had mocked and dismissed her now offered their respect. The golden thread in her chest blazed with overwhelmed joy. "Rise," Matthias commanded, and they obeyed. "There will be a coronation in 1 month's time. Lady Lyra will take her place as queen officially, and we will celebrate not just a crown, but the triumph of love over politics." He strode across the room to where Lyra stood, still stunned by the turn of events. When he reached her, he took her good hand in his and raised it to his lips. "What say you, my love?" he asked, loud enough for all to hear. "Will you be my queen?" The answer came from somewhere deeper than thought, somewhere the golden thread connected her soul to his. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong, "always yes." When he kissed her there in front of the assembled court, gentle and reverent and full of promise, the cheers that erupted shook the very foundations of the castle. Duke Aldrich was forgotten. Politics were forgotten. All that mattered was the love blazing between them, bright enough to warm a kingdom. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of wedding preparations and quiet miracles. Lyra's orphanage opened 3 days after Duke Aldrich's banishment, funded by the forfeited Duke's estates and staffed by volunteers who had witnessed their queen's compassion. The East Wing rang with children's laughter for the first time in decades, and Lyra spent her mornings there, teaching letters to little ones who reminded her achingly of herself. "Look, Your Majesty," 7-year-old Emma tugged on Lyra's gown, holding up a slate covered in crooked letters. "I wrote my name." "It's beautiful, sweetheart." Lyra knelt to Emma's level, her heart full as she traced the child's careful work. "And you can call me Lyra. We're family here." Emma's gap-toothed grin could have powered the entire castle. The court had transformed as well. Word of their queen's origins spread beyond the castle walls, and suddenly Lyra found herself approached by commoners who had never dared speak to nobility before. Servants who had once been invisible to the previous court now found their concerns heard and addressed. The castle's working staff began to stand straighter, speak louder, smile more. "You've given them hope," Matthias said one evening as they walked through the corridors, watching their people move with newfound dignity. "They see that someone like them can rise. That kindness matters more than bloodlines." "I just see them," Lyra replied, her hand in his. "The way you saw me." The golden thread hummed with contentment between them, stronger now than ever. Her wolf had settled into peaceful coexistence, a silver presence that purred whenever Matthias was near. She still couldn't shift completely. The healers said it might take years for her dormant abilities to fully awaken. But the wolf was there, warm and protective and utterly devoted to her mate. 6 months after that terrible night in the garden, Lyra stood before a mirror in the royal dressing chambers, hardly recognizing the woman staring back at her. The wedding gown was a masterpiece of ivory silk and silver embroidery, fitted to her curves and flowing behind her in a train that seemed to capture starlight. The crown of the queens of the 5 kingdoms rested on her silver-streaked hair, not the delicate circlet she'd expected, but a magnificent creation of white gold and diamonds that caught the light like captured dreams. "You look like a queen," said Elena, the maid who had become her closest friend and confidant. "I feel like I'm playing dress-up," Lyra admitted, smoothing the silk nervously. "Then you're playing the part perfectly." Lyra turned to find Matthias in the doorway, devastatingly handsome in his formal wedding attire. His storm-grey eyes held the same wonder they'd shown that first morning in the great hall, as if he still couldn't quite believe she was real. "You're not supposed to see me before the ceremony," she protested weakly. "I couldn't stay away." He moved toward her with that liquid grace that never failed to make her breath catch. "Besides, there's something I need to tell you before we walk down that aisle." Eleanor discreetly slipped from the room, leaving them alone. Matthias stopped just close enough that she could feel his warmth, his hands hovering near her face like he was afraid to disturb her perfection. "I love you," he said simply. "Not because you're brave, though you are. Not because you're kind, though your heart amazes me every day. I love you because when I was lost, you became my home." The golden thread blazed between them, and Lyra felt tears threaten to ruin her carefully applied cosmetics. "You were never lost," she whispered. "You were just waiting in the right place for me to find you." His smile was radiant as sunshine breaking through storm clouds. "Ready to marry me, my love?" "I've been ready since the moment you called me everything." The ceremony was held in the castle's great hall, the same room where wine had spilled and worlds had collided 6 months before. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting everything in jewelled colours as hundreds of guests witnessed the marriage of their king to the orphan girl who had stolen his heart. Lyra walked down the aisle alone. She had no father to give her away, but she didn't need one. She was giving herself freely, choosing love over fear, choosing to belong somewhere at last. At the altar, Matthias waited with tears in his eyes and promises on his lips. "I, Matthias, take you, Lyra, to be my queen." His voice rang clear and strong. "I promise to see your worth when you forget it. I promise to defend your heart as fiercely as I defend my kingdom. I promise to love you not because you complete me, but because you inspire me to be complete myself." When it was her turn, Lyra spoke from her heart rather than the traditional words. "I, Lyra, take you, Matthias, to be my king and my home. I promise to stand beside you in strength, not behind you in weakness. I promise to love your people as fiercely as I love you. I promise to choose you every day for the rest of my life, because you taught me that I was worthy of choosing." The kiss that sealed their marriage was gentle and reverent and full of golden light that seemed to emanate from their joined souls. When they broke apart, the cheers that erupted could be heard 3 kingdoms over. "My queen," Matthias murmured against her lips. "My king," she replied, and felt her wolf sing with pure joy. The celebration lasted until dawn, but eventually the newly crowned king and queen retired to chambers that were truly theirs now. Shared spaces filled with books they both loved, windows that let in morning light, a bed large enough for 2 people who never wanted to sleep apart. "No regrets?" Matthias asked as they stood together on their balcony, watching the sun rise over their kingdom. Lyra thought of the frightened girl who had spilled wine and expected punishment, of the lonely years before she learned what home could feel like, of all the pain that had led her to this moment of perfect happiness. "None," she said firmly. "Every moment of hurt was worth this. Worth you. Worth us." "Even when the court gossips about the servant queen?" "Let them gossip." Lyra's hand moved unconsciously to rest on her still flat stomach, where new life was just beginning to grow. Their heir, conceived in love rather than duty, would inherit a kingdom where kindness mattered more than bloodlines. "They'll change their tune when they see what we build together." Matthias's eyes followed her gesture, and wonder bloomed across his face. "Are you?" "3 weeks." Her smile was radiant with joy and anticipation. "I wanted to be sure before I told you." The kiss he gave her was desperate with happiness, his hands cradling her face like she held the sun and stars and everything beautiful in the world. "I love you," he said against her lips, "my queen, my mate, my everything." "And I love you," she replied, "my king, my home, my heart." As the sun climbed higher, painting their kingdom in shades of gold and promise, Lyra finally understood what the golden thread had always known. She wasn't nothing special after all. She was everything. Where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts on these stories. If you'd like to support me, please subscribe. It's free and it helps more people hear these tales of love conquering all odds.